Right. Welcome to another edition of Data in the Hallway. My name is Ray Paik, Community Manager at PingCAP, joined as always by my co-host Daniel. How are you, Daniel? So,
Oh,
uh, nice to see sunny weather in the Netherlands. And we're joined by a guest, Terry Purcell. I mean, Terry, you recently joined, PingCAP, I think just the last couple of months. So it's great to have you. Great to have you initiated the podcast. And I think the topic today, it's a pretty broad topic, but an interesting topic for a lot of people. We want to talk about database performance optimization. You bring a lot of experience from prior to PingCAP. I think you spent a long time working on DB2, the database like a lot of people are very familiar with. So, Terry, welcome. Thanks for joining us, and I'll let you introduce yourself to the audience.
yeah, thanks, Ray. Thanks, Daniel. I've been doing query optimization, which is a subset of database optimization. It's a critical part of application performance and database performance. I've been doing that well over 20 years. I worked for DB2 for ZOS, the mainframe, optimizer developer for 18 years. I was the architect for their query optimizer for the last 10 years that I was there. I did have a brief stint for a few years working on a distributed SQL database at a competitor of ours. So I've had a little bit of experience in the newer technologies outside of the legacy databases. So it's great to be at PingCAP, and it's great to see how we can sort of grow the performance of TiDB.
Right. Well, we're definitely excited to have you. I mean, 18 years on DB2, 18 years that's even, well, I think twice as long as TiDB community's been around, so that's certainly a long time. So cool. This might sound like a very we'll start off a little broadly, I guess, but and this may seem like a very basic question, but what is database performance optimization and how is that even done? Yeah.
Yeah, it's an incredibly broad topic.
Mhm.
When you talk about optimizing aspects of the database performance, that's what we're talking
Mhm.
about. And part of that is the application performance, which is insert, update, delete performance, data retrieval, select performance. There's other aspects of database performance like the data maintenance activities. You might be doing bulk loads of data, backup, recovery, operations like that, optimizing every aspect
Mhm.
um, of the database's performance, because ultimately you're paying for CPU. Your customers have an expectation of a certain response time of the application. We take so much of database performance or application performance for granted as consumers. You go to the ATM, well, you can't stand there for 5 minutes waiting for your money to come out, right?
Mhm.
And a point of sale transaction, at a cash register or whatever, you're expecting all of these things, or a website to load. You expect these things to happen in seconds. And ultimately, as a consumer, you don't know or care about what has gone on behind the scenes for that application to process, your request in that short amount of time. So it is a really big topic. But I'm going to sort of steer it more towards my area of expertise, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah. So you mentioned that query optimization is part of database optimization. So what aspect of the performance are you dealing with when you're looking at query optimizations?
So, if our audience is predominantly technology people, they'll understand,
Mhm.
DBAs, application
Mhm.
developers. For the database, you're writing SQL, or the SQL is being generated, to retrieve data from your database. And again, retrieve data, I'm talking about select statements. Of course, there are
Mhm.
insert, update, delete operations. But the the select performance or the data retrieval performance is often where the challenges come in for the database to decide how to retrieve the data. And that's where we get into the true, um, the true guts of query optimization within the database. And so it is an incredibly critical part of each
Mm,
database, but it's typically outside of those who specialize in it. It's not a typically well understood discipline of database
mm.
performance.
Yeah. So go ahead, Daniel. Sorry.
So is it more like trying to make sure that the query is executed in the most efficient and optimal way, or is it more like adjusting things that to take better use of the hardware features that maybe disk might be faster nowadays, or there might be more memory that might be used more efficiently?
Yes, yes, and yes. Because what you talked about, Daniel, and I know it's the other part why it's a really difficult topic is because sometimes you want to talk at a high level enough so that people understand what you're talking about, but it's very easy to quickly deep dive into one aspect of it. I mean, ultimately, what the goal of the query optimizer is to consider as many as the viable plans as possible and choose the one that has the lowest cost. So, the more complex the SQL statement is, the more alternative ways that the database could choose to retrieve performance. And often, a GPS is one of the best examples of this, right, Daniel? To your question, you know, Google Maps or Apple Maps, whichever you use, when you're currently at point A and you want to get to point B, you know, um, Google Maps will give you all of these different alternatives. It will choose the one that it thinks that is the optimal. Um, but it's also trying to take into consideration, current traffic, current roadworks, things like that. So a GPS is kind of the best analogy that you can come up with. There are multiple ways for typically there, or again, based upon what the available choices are, um, from the database perspective and the complexity of the query, there may be many different ways that we as the query optimizer could choose to access the underlying data that's being requested. And as you implied, there are a lot of different factors that could go into that. And things like, your available memory. Certain plans could be more memory intensive than others as you're using memory to try and you know, consolidate or either hash or store data into a certain, to sort of group data together before you take the next step and so forth. It can get pretty involved. Like I said, it can go deep pretty quickly, this discussion.
Cool. And I think you, like I mentioned early on, like, I mean, let's say I'm a developer of financial services applications. Like, do most developers or users even see optimizations that are happening? Or like, do they even have, like, as a developer, as an app developer, do I even have a control uh, uh, in terms of like optimizing queries or database performances? Like,
So when we're talking, if
yeah,
we're like we've quickly pivoted to query
yeah,
optimization, which again
yeah,
I'm totally fine with because that's where
yeah.
my expertise is. For the most part, application developers may not really consider the query optimization aspects of their query.
Mhm.
Um, it can depend on their interest level, um, and also the need. Often an application developer, we all know it. My goal as an application developer is to develop my application as quickly as I'm able to do,
Mm,
and deploy it. Um, and if the performance in your performance testing is adequate or up to your expectations, you may not investigate further how or why the query optimizer chose the plan that it did. If things work, you often just then leave them alone. So that's, but there are often people that have a lot of interest in understanding, the available choices and why the query optimizer chose what it did. And that's, so it's either out of interest that they may deep dive, or they have a need because the performance wasn't what they expected.
Right. Okay, cool. Yeah. And earlier we talked about, I mean, quote unquote, I mean, because I put it in quotes because legacy, the term legacy sometimes can have a negative connotation. Like legacy databases like DB2 or even Oracle RDBMS. I had to look this up. Like a DB2, first release was like 1983, which is 41 years old. It's probably older than like most people that are listening to this episode. And Oracle's even older, like a few years older than that. So obviously they've been looking at database performances, query optimizations for a long time. And then we have newer communities like TiDB or other distributed SQL databases. So do these local legacy databases have better handle on like performance or query optimizations? They've been doing it for a long time, or is that just a misconception on some people's part? Like,
There's multiple sides to this. To some degree, they clearly have a level of maturity and stability because of the years. And like I said in my intro, I worked in DB2 for ZOS for a long time, and there was working in TiDB or looking at some of our competitors. There's certain optimizations that the newer databases don't have just because of their lower levels of maturity. They're less mature. But the other side to that is that, when you say DB2, Oracle, they're 40 years old, their code bases are also 40 years old. And they may not have been developed in a manner that made changes easy to apply. Some of the newer databases, when you're talking about, one aspect of query optimization that's an important part is the query rewrite or query transformation phase where, someone writes or an SQL is generated. They write the SQL in a certain manner, and there are potentially ways that the database could simplify the query or rewrite certain where clause conditions or where clause predicates such that they can be applied in a more efficient manner. So, those query rewrites are, well understood and documented in the industry. But a lot of the need for some of these have come about because of the complexity of queries these days. When DB2 Oracle, in the 80s and 90s, the complexity of the queries was lower, right? In late 1990s, 2000s, and later, there's a lot of query generation applications that are where it's an application program that's generating the queries, and they're often generating more complex combinations of queries, and so that placed more stress on the query rewrite aspect of the databases. And in those older legacy databases, it can be a little bit slower to adapt to some of those new patterns that we see in the newer generated applications. So there's two parts to it, right? That the new databases are more agile, but the older databases have a level of stability and maturity because of their years. So yeah,
cool.
that's the way I see the two different eras of database and query optimization.
Yeah, so if you look at the past, like there's a lot of difference with hardware, etc. But if you look into the other direction, many people now are talking about AI. Is that also something that comes up when like query optimization is involved?
It does. I mean, when, I think every query optimization team right now is looking at how to use AI. We did do a lot of work at IBM in that space. We did actually deploy a solution to augment the query optimizer with with a sort of machine learning and AI concepts. I think what uh, in general, outside of query optimization, people believe that AI can solve a lot of problems, and that's true. Um, in the area of query optimization, one aspect of the query optimizer is what we call the cost model, which is, a set of algorithms that help you identify the true cost of each underlying database operation. And that's a significant part of determining which is the lowest cost plan of the plans that that the database considers to be viable. Sorry, I'm getting very deep here. But um, in DB2, we did a lot of investigation, and these query optimizers are purpose built, and we struggled to get anywhere near the degree of accuracy that we get from the traditional query optimizer with machine learning. The amount of errors or learning that customers would tolerate is not very high. When you have a well-functioning query optimizer that has a high success rate, um, it's very difficult to just replace it with AI because AI has a learning aspect to it. And so we're not there yet with regards to AI taking over query optimization, but certainly um, those that are knowledgeable in the field of query optimization do recognize that there are areas where you can augment the query optimizer with AI.
Cool, cool.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So, I think we'll if it's okay, we'll move towards, I mean, I think we talked about query optimizers and database performance in general. We'll talk about, query optimization in TiDB. Can you talk about, what's our general philosophy in terms of addressing performance and optimization and what architectural, I mean, I think hopefully a lot of the listeners have seen our architectural diagrams. So how do some of those components sort of contribute to helping with database and query optimizations?
Yeah, I mean it's a really good segue because
Yeah.
ultimately, if I'm implying that every database has a query optimizer, which is
Mhm.
true, and the legacy databases have some maturity advantage,
Mhm.
then how do we compete? How do we differentiate ourselves? So it's how are we differentiating ourselves from the legacy databases, and also how are we differentiating ourselves from other competitors that are also new. And you're right, our architecture of having um, the HTAP style architecture, which is the hybrid model of a row store database, which is your traditional relational database architecture,
Mhm.
often benefits OLTP workloads the best, and then also having the option for what we call TiFlash, which is effectively a column store style implementation, which is better for OLAP style or processing larger volumes of data. So we have that hybrid infrastructure, and some other databases have that. DB2 has that as well. Um, Oracle HeatWave has that
Mhm.
architecture as well. And so that in itself gives an advantage in that basically the query optimizer, as I mentioned, is trying to choose the most efficient plan from the available choices. The key aspect there is choices. So if your underlying database execution architecture gives you good choices or optimal choices, then the query optimizer has an easier job, right? Because
Mhm.
there are better performing execution options within that database. So the TiFlash is a very efficient scan, and instead of in some aspects you're for queries you're having to index to limit down to a subset of the data. Um, that's a standard query optimization or database design option. But often, the number of indexes you may need may be prohibitive from creating too many. And then at some point, you may just have to scan the underlying table. Well, if you've got a very efficient scan solution, which we have in our TiFlash, then that actually gives you an advantage. Some other databases may need to create more indexes than we do. That's one aspect. So to me, our architecture, gives us an advantage for those queries where you may need to, they're not pure OLTP queries where you need to process more data. Having that
Mhm.
hybrid architecture is a significant advantage. But like I say, you know, um, some other databases have that. So, that just puts us on a level playing field with those
Mhm.
databases. And it's interesting that some of the mature databases have that, and we're one of the newer databases, and we've got that architecture. So that's an
Right.
advantage for us. Um, the other aspect when I talk about maturity is, we really um, had this mindset in DB2 because of the mission critical customers that we had. And that is when I talked about maturity of the query optimizer, I also talked about stability. And
Mhm.
it's great to choose the optimal plan, but customers want reliability and stability, and they were typically getting that from the legacy databases. I'm not seeing that understanding of what it takes for stability in some of our competitors or many of the newer databases. And simply because to me, again, I've been doing this a while, and in DB2, you know, well, if I take a step back, query optimization, there's jokes out there that it's really hard. It's harder than rocket science, blah, 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 right? And so it's a very difficult discipline. But there is a lot of research out there that have solved a lot of the problems that we need to solve in query optimization. But to me, um, research is not always real world. And so there is
Mhm.
academic query optimization and there is practical query optimization. So how do you take the principles of query optimization and apply them to a real world where um, applications are moving rapidly and your database is trying to keep up with what the customer's application is doing and make decisions when sometimes you might not have all of the information up to date. So again, that's where that level of stability was there in the legacy databases. Well, I should say maybe DB2 because
Mhm.
although a lot of companies rely on Oracle, to me as a query optimization um, architect and expert in the field, your measure of the success of your query optimizer to me is how much you need to rely on hints. If you
Mhm.
need to rely on hints a lot in your SQL, that tells me you have incredible weakness in your query optimizer. And Oracle's foundation of query optimization is heavily dependent on hints. So that tells
Mhm.
me they've achieved a level of stability, reliability through DBA and application developer intervention rather than their actual skill.
Mhm.
Is it always an issue with hints? Because like the optimizer has the queries in the hints as an input, but the other part it gets as an input is the table statistics. And based on what kind of index you're using, the statistics might be way off, and like then you can't really blame the optimizer, right?
So that's a good question. You can't really blame the optimizer. Um, it's funny for me as a like I say, as a query optimizer person, um, working for IBM, as I mentioned, the customers we had, mission critical customers, they expected, they you get what you pay for, right? A high quality product. Um, and to your point, Daniel, if a customer ran into an issue and my vice president, said, "Hey, big customer, has just raised this issue and they've escalated it up to our level. I need you to solve it." And I say, "But this is query optimization. It's a really difficult problem." Their response is, "I don't care." Right? So
Yeah.
I I grew up through the query optimization arena where we were working with high dollar customers that just wanted things to work. So I wasn't permitted to say, "Oh, can't blame the optimizer," right? So, but you're right, Daniel, and that's where I said that these applications are moving at a rapid rate with regards to the data volumes, and often it can be difficult for the database to keep up with the statistics, right? So one of them, and I threw in some little statements. I mentioned academic or research-based query optimization versus practical query optimization. In research, they don't run into this problem, because they have a static environment where they might have a massive amount of data, and they're investigating really, really difficult problems, but they're not trying to chase a workload like our query optimizers are in actually the real world. And so that's where a lot of, I see in the newer databases, really smart people working in query optimization, but they have that academic and research mindset, and they don't have the experience of that mission critical customer that expects you to solve things in the real world outside of the research arena. So
Cool.
and even in my first few months here at TiDB, I've already jumped into the query optimization code and started to implement some solutions for answering questions about what do you do when you have a degree of staleness to your statistics. That you can see that there's some latency, you're a little bit behind. What choices do you make in those instances? And it becomes a judgment call because you're missing something. So how do you validate it? Those are the difficult aspects of query optimization that, like I say, I don't see uh, that experience in some of the other newer databases. So that's also how I feel that we can differentiate ourselves, and we're already starting to do that because when you come from that different discipline of the legacy databases, then you you approach the solutions in TiDB in a slightly different way, right? You're understanding the theory behind query optimization, but you're also have an appreciation of the challenges of customer workloads and how you can address some of those challenges that the query optimizer has in a practical way. Sorry, that
Cool.
was a long answer, right?
No, no.
Basically, the infrastructure
Yeah.
is TiDB's infrastructure has an advantage over a lot of our competitors, and also I believe our focus on stability, um, that stability aspect to augment the traditional query optimizer decisions. I believe that's going to serve us really well, especially as as companies who are using these newer databases expect the same level of maturity that they got from the legacy databases.
Cool. Yeah, I'm sure you enjoy getting those emails or phone calls from vice presidents like, here, go fix it. So cool. So yeah, and for those of you that are interested in more details about query optimization in TiDB, I believe, Terry, you're going to be doing a webinar. I mean, this podcast episode will go out in second half of March 2024, but I think like sometime in the second quarter of 2024, we'll have a formal webinar with slides, a lot more details. I mean, slides, we can't do any visual stuff on the podcast, but if I highly encourage people to find out more about, kind of work that Terry does and find out more details about our TiDB query optimization. And I mean, obviously, this is a very popular topic. I mean, database developers, from my experience, are very passionate about performance and optimizations. I think like we've had barely about 20 episodes in this podcast series. I think this is a third episode talking about performance or optimizations. Like our colleague Ahmad appeared twice to talk about HTAP benchmark. Just about a month ago, he talked about Index Advisor. And speaking of like providing hints to developers, but so if you want to check out those earlier episodes, I'll include those in the episode description. So I'm sure this won't be the last time we talk about database performance, because it's a lot of people love talking about. So I think we're wrapping up here. The last question we have, this is a tradition we have. I know, Terry, you're in the process of moving across the country to the beautiful Olympic Peninsula in the Pacific Northwest, but now you're still in Springfield, Illinois. I don't know and my parents live in Illinois, so I know somewhat of the geography of the state, but Terry, tell the audience about Springfield, Illinois. Like, where is it, and why would people want to visit Springfield, Illinois?
Yeah, so it's the state capital of Illinois. Chicago is not the capital. Springfield is. It is about 3 hours drive from Chicago. It's actually closer to St. Louis, Missouri. Why you would visit, I think its main claim to fame is that Abraham Lincoln, as one of the most, famous and well-respected presidents of the U.S., grew up or was an adult, spent his adulthood here. He wasn't born here, but of course, you'd claim him here because he's such a prominent figure in American history. So that's one reason. To me, there's always fun little facts. When I moved here, I was also just like Abraham Lincoln, wasn't born here. They have a state fair in August every year, the Illinois State Fair, and you'll have to come in August because you can go to the dairy pavilion, and they have a butter cow, a cow carved out of butter every year. Just to me, that's the most interesting fact about Springfield, Illinois. Not Abraham Lincoln, but you can come and see the butter cow.
Wow, sounds like the Midwest of the U.S. So, I mean, I've never been to Springfield. I've been to a few different parts of the state, but somebody told me they were taking their kids on a college tour. So they're going from, I forget the direction. They want to visit both St. Louis and Chicago, and like you said, in the middle there is Springfield, and they told me how much they enjoyed the visit. They just didn't expect it. They were just going to spend the night and then drive to the next destination. But all the Lincoln-related like museums and historical sites they got to visit, and they were very impressed. So
and I think Route 66, Route 66 too. Historically, there's a lot of memorabilia and diners and stuff like that around here that commemorate that, which is another cool aspect to this part of the West as well.
Yeah, hopefully I'll get to check it out next time I visit the state of Illinois. So, well, thanks for being on, Terry, and best of luck with your move. I mean, moves always stressful, but it's even worse, I think, driving across the country or moving across the country. So that's a lot. All right, well, thanks. And then and then I mentioned the webinar about TiDB Optimizer. Once we have the details, I'll include it in the event description as well. So thanks, and we'll talk to you all again soon.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks, Daniel. Appreciate it.
Bye.